welcome to the latest in the series of ASFP webinars. We're going to talk today, the title was Don't Be Unconsciously Incompetent with Passive Fire Protection. We've got fast approaching 370 people on the call already, and we'll keep an eye on that as we go forwards. How today will work, I'm sure many of you have been to one of these sessions already, so you know how the general format of these things. I'm doing a quick welcome, and in fact, I'm doing the whole of the first presentation. So the way we've set this up, it's a 2-hour session. For the first hour, it's a presentation by me, followed by a comfort break to give you all a chance to go and get yourself a cup of tea, coffee, and do whatever. During that, I would ask you, we've got a Q&A type function on the webinar. We've got a chat box on the webinar. Please, can you put us questions into the Q&A box on the subject of competence in passive fire for the panel to discuss? Then for the second hour, we'll come back. We've got a panel with representatives from UL, from LABC, from CABE, and from the finishes and interior sector. And we're going to bring ourselves together, and we will discuss the questions that you ask us about competence for that second hour. Then at the end of it, we have a sum up and close. So that's how we'll do. So please, can you, if there's any, as we go through the presentation, or if you've got something, question on competence in passive fire, stick it on the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on the chat box, but it helps really if you put the questions in there. And as we go through, as ever, as we go through the presentation, I've got 4 poll questions, which I'm going to be asking you to give us some feedback and to help see what you think about various topics as we go forwards. Webinar timetable, we've done a number of these things already. And what we've been doing, we've been working through the construction process. In April, we did a session, Joe Celia from FIS and I did a session on PFP for contractors and installers and dryliners. Then in May, we did one on modern forms of compartmentation, such as glass partitions with glazing with GGF and fire resisting curtains. Then today's roundtable on competence. Next month, we've got one on PFP and refurbishment projects, and as well as a member update, then we've got in August, we've got one in September on structural fire protection. Okay, as usual, we've got this webinar has been CPD accredited, and that's been organised through the Institution of Fire Engineers. If you email info@asfp.org.uk, we can organise a CPD certificate. And first questions already come in, and yes, the prior webinars have been recorded, and this webinar is recorded, so that if you are watching this webinar now, that's fine. If you can't catch all of it or whatever, we will put stuff on there. But I would say if you're watching this webinar on catch up, unfortunately you can't get a CPD certificate. info@asfp.org.uk if you want one within 2 weeks, and we will put that up at the end of the session as well for you. Which brings me nicely and neatly to poll question 1. And what's going to happen now with any luck is that Georgina in the office presses a button and poll question 1 should appear on your screen in front of you. It doesn't if you watch, not always if you're watching this on a phone, but for the vast majority of you, hopefully you can now see poll question 1 in front of you. How are you involved in passive fire protection? How does the competence of passive fire protection interest you? What do you do? And there's a whole list of things there. Can you please stick on there and see what do you think? We've got over 420 people on the call now, so we'll leave it for a few moments for those answers to come in, and we'll see who we've got in the audience. So it's a really, there you go, it's a really good broad spread. We've got 23% other, it's always an interesting one. 22% fire risk assessors, but we've also got a healthy spread of architects, designers, not very many specifiers, some manufacturers, and etc. etc. So that's good to see. Right. Okay. So without further ado, let's have a look at this presentation. And right, so we're going to talk a bit about discussions about competence as we go forwards, and we're going to talk about the legal requirements as they stand at the moment. Obviously, since Grenfell, there's been a big push in regulation, and we see potentially some changes in future regulation. I'll do some bits and pieces on why is PFP so complicated, and what makes it such a difficult subject, and the need for a qualification or a qualified person, and then say after a comfort break, we'll come back and we'll do questions to the panel. And I'm sure all of you have seen the whole thing about, we use the phrase unconsciously incompetent in the title. There's a handy little graphic. Unconsciously incompetent, basically you don't know and don't recognize that you don't know stuff about a subject. And certainly what we've seen in the past is that in the past there were an awful lot of people who were unconsciously incompetent when it came down to passive fire protection. So if we think about competence in construction, Building a Safer Future, the Hackett report published in May 2018, it mentions the need to improve competence. The word competence appears in that document about over 150 times. There's a chapter 5 of the document. It is solely about competence, and there's a quote there from the construction sector and the fire safety sector should work together, develop continuous improvement approaches to competence levels. We should be working all the time to drive competence levels up. And in fact, I mean, I could have produced all the recommendations out of section 5, but I picked this one out from 5.3. Relevant parties, along with relevant professional bodies, working together, common approach, a competence framework applies to all building standards inspectors, and it will be interesting to get Trevor's opinion on that as we get into the panel this afternoon, and consider whether the competence requirements for buildings inspectors, whether they should be for high risk, high rise residential buildings, or whether they should be used on other multi-occupancy residential buildings and institutional residential buildings. So Dame Judith said to us, as an industry, you need to get more competent in dealing with these things. Okay, and we recognize that, and I'm sure you've all seen that report, you've all read that report, you know of it, and are aware of that, or at least I hope you are. We'll find out that later. Okay, now at the moment, there isn't a legal requirement currently. I mean, the closest thing we have to a legal requirement currently is this in England and Wales. It's this document, Regulation 7, approved document 7, and it says, and the law says, there's that the green box is text taken from the Building Act. Building work shall be carried out in a workmanlike manner. Okay, so from a competence of install, okay, that's the it's purely a workmanlike manner, and that's the whole way. Now it does describe lots of different ways in which you can prove that your work is being done in a workmanlike manner. The first way being third-party certification. Okay, but it also mentions a self-certification scheme, it mentions history, and it mentions testing. Okay, now admittedly in our area there's not much that's done where we prove installs by testing. You don't tend to build parts of a building and then set fire to it to make sure that the fire stopping works. But so we don't tend to do that one, but there are those different methods of proving your workmanship in there, and third-party certification is only one of those. Now, I started off with that unconsciously incompetent from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. So I now know, I now recognize that I don't know what I don't know, to consciously competent. And then finally you get to the, unconsciously competent. I don't have to think about this. It's all second nature. I understand. Blah, blah, blah. I would say that lots of people have recently moved from the first stage to the second stage, because all of a sudden people have started to, post-Grenfell, people have started to get very, very aware of the risks in fire and what's going on and how that's unfolding. But where risks were ignored historically, now people are more risk averse, and the response is more along the lines of, passive fire. I know that's bad news. I don't want any of the risk. I'm just going to try and get that moved somewhere else. However, at the same time as saying that, we've not got everybody to there, because we still, those of you that watch the things that go on in LinkedIn, we still see pink foam seals appearing on LinkedIn as, look, I've just gone, an inspector will say, I've gone onto site and I've found this. There was a couple on there last week where we had bats, where fire resisting bats sealed in place with pink foam. Completely and utterly untested solution. So whoever done that hadn't considered, they were still in the yellow circle. Okay. Now, before I go any further, that therefore brings me to a second poll question. Okay, so as we've mentioned this, so here's a question for you. How do you, in doing what you do on a daily basis, ensure that you're meeting the requirements of AD Regulation 7? Okay, do you, because all of these are mentioned as possible ways of proving workmanlike behavior. How do you do that? And what I'd like you to do, is pick the highest level, the one that you used most, should I say, the approach that you use most. And the good news is that over half of you were using independent third-party certificated installers, but beyond 13% are using testing in fire. So you're actually taking examples of work and setting fire to them, because that's what that's saying, is that I'm taking stuff installed by my site installers and burning it to prove that it meets Regulation 7. Okay, so there you go. So that's where we're up to. So there's over half of you are using third-party certification, which is good, but I would say could be better. Right, let's move on. Let's consider where regulation is going in this. Okay. Regulatory update. Fire Safety Bill was enacted in April 2021, and that covers things to determine things, stuff along the lines of reinforcing the regulatory reform order on fire safety. It defines that flat front doors and external walls are common parts of buildings, and that's gone through. Next up is the Building Safety Bill, and one of the things that was the controversies of these is the fact that the Fire Safety Bill didn't resolve the who pays dilemma. And as these things have gone through consultation, and so they've moved through the consultation process, we're in a situation where, of course, there are an awful lot of leaseholders out there who have a building that's not as fit for purpose as they bought it, and so as a result, then that's why these things are being delayed, we think, because the government needs to resolve this and come up with a way of doing this. They don't want to pay, but then conversely, why should leaseholders who bought a building in good faith now suddenly be saddled with a large bill for these things? Right. The second draft, the first draft of Building Safety Bill was published just under 12 months ago, and the second draft was due out sometime in autumn, and we're now told it's due midsummer this year, but who knows? It's already been mentioned in 3 Queen's speeches, and there's a reminder that the Building Safety Bill is all the legal framework that's going to underpin the work to enact the 53 recommendations in Dame Judith Hackett's Building a Safer Future report. So if we look at Building Safety Bill, it's going to give us a more stringent regulatory regime. It's going to clearly identify a series of duty holders, and you can see there the duty holders we're going to end up with statutory responsibilities. There's going to be a gateways, and there's a slide on the gateways and setting the gateways up, because the first one of those gateways goes live in August. There's going to be a new, more stringent regime in occupation, so that there's a new building safety manager assessing risks. We're going to see, for high risk buildings, we're going to see safety cases and maintaining information about the building, the old golden thread. And residents get more of a voice, and therefore the residents have to be engaged. And there's a whole new regulator that's going to underpin all this. Mention that the pathway to getting through legislation in terms of the Building Safety Bill. So we see here the draft bill came out in July last year. It was sent off to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee for a process called pre-legislative scrutiny. They put a call out. There were about 350 responses to that call, and those responses, about half of them were from people who said, I'm a leaseholder, I'm going to get saddled with a big bill, it's not fair. ASFP put our comments in about the proposed testing system, and the select committee produced a report. And that report was produced in about October, November last year. And what was meant to happen thereafter was we would get a second draft and a response from government as to whether they would look at the select committee recommendations, whether they would adopt them or whether they wouldn't adopt them. And if they wouldn't adopt them, why wouldn't they adopt them? The select committee recommended that the government paid for the responses, and I don't like the fact that my camera is working, that's all right. I thought the internet in Ellswick was down again. So the select committee wanted the government to pick up the tab, and the select committee also, so one of the other recommendations that was in there from the select committee was that you've got these 2 boxes down here for primary legislation and secondary legislation. The Building Safety Bill is primary legislation. There will be other changes beyond that, secondary legislation, and the government's recommendation was don't do them consecutively. Do the secondary legislation at the same time as you do the primary. Okay, so regulatory regime, there will be a new regulatory regime for high risk buildings set under the auspices of Health and Safety Exec. There will be a lead inspector which can be delegated by the Building Safety Regulator within HSE, and there will be a multidisciplinary team of working on those projects, including not only the building control, but also fire and rescue services as we go through. And we have a gateway process. And the gateway process, gateway 1 occurs as part of the planning process. And so there will be a requirement for a very much more detailed fire assessment as part of the planning before you even get to the design and the permission to build. So there's the gateway 1 gives us an extra step, and that gateway 1 it's on the next slide. That gateway 1 goes live under the new auspices of the new regulator as of the 1st of August. So if you're planning a new high risk structure after the 1st of August, there's a whole load of extra stuff that you're going to have to consider. You almost get to a lot more detailed design work going to go on into the very concept stage before you get to technical design and permission to construct and permission to occupy. So as I say, the recommendation was that the requirement for building safety bill was do secondary legislation concurrently with the primary, and we're already starting to see some of the secondary legislation for the building safety bill coming out. So we see a new shadow regulator under HSE. Peter Baker is our new Chief Inspector of Buildings. Hackett Gateway 1 goes live for high risk residential buildings as of the 1st of August. And we've now got confirmed that the Office of Product Safety and Standards, OPSS, is the new construction product regulator lead. And they've been given a £10 million budget to set up a team to look at that. There is one missing piece of secondary legislation, and that's the definition of high risk. Now, at the moment, high risk is set at an arbitrary 18-metre height. MHCLG ran a consultation early 2020, and they said, right, well, what do you think? And they got a lot of responses back, and those responses back was that maybe we need a more holistic approach. They've been sort of mentioning that they may well reduce 18 metres to 11 metres, but we're still awaiting the outcome of that consultation. And the reason for those two pictures, I'm sure many of you will recognise Beechmere Care Home, because of course, under the existing regulation, the height-based regulation, Beechmere Care Home wouldn't necessarily on its own be a high risk, because it's not high rise, it's not over 18 metres. And so there is, obviously that flags up some of the areas of concern within this. Right, that takes me nicely to poll question 3. So what do you think that within building safety bill, there is all sorts of stuff we're going to come on to next in terms of enhanced regulatory schemes, including enhanced competency schemes for those of us that work. So we're going to talk a bit about competence developments next. Where do you think, what sorts of structures do you think we should be applying enhanced competency schemes to? Should that be high risk residential buildings as in the 18 metres? Should we drop it to 11? Should we be identifying buildings by a holistic review process, or to any residential building? What I haven't done is gone backwards and said actually we should be above 18 metres, because I don't think anyone's going to go in that direction. And we'll see where that takes us. Again, the vast majority of you are, say, let's have a holistic review process. Interestingly, 35% say in any residential building, but there you go. So that gives us a scope. The more people in favour of increasing the stringency, certainly more people in favour of increasing the stringency with where we get to. So we'll see where government takes us on that. Okay. Right, so what else has happened since Hackett? Since the Hackett report came out, Building a Safer Future, one of the key areas with regards to competence, Dame Judy said, don't wait for government to regulate. And there's a couple of 3 occasions where she says industry should do this. And if they don't, then government can regulate, but industry should do this first. So many of you will know, and I'm hoping there will even be people who are involved in the Joint Industry Response Group, which was initially led by the Construction Industry Council, by Build UK and the Construction Products Authority. They came together, they put 12 working groups together, considering the individual tasks involved. And there are 2 reports published. Raising the Bar was published in August 2019, and Setting the Bar was published October last year, looking at competence regimes for building for the Building a Safer Future project. Okay, right. 2 key recommendations from there. one of the recommendations that setting the bar said was, wherever appropriate, government should mandate persons working on high-risk buildings to be registered, certified by a recognised professional, or certified by a recognised certification body. And the industry should adopt a framework of various different systems, which will consist of, and the first one is accredited third-party certification of companies. Okay. Now, what we don't know is, at the moment, this was put forward by Working Group 2 within the Industry Response Group for installers, whether this list will be treated as an and list or as an or list. Ideally, what we'd like to see is this treated as an and list. And this is not just, well, I'll pick something, oh, you know, it's a CPD. The whole thing works together. And maybe that's where we'll get to. Going forwards, the government's going to take on a higher profile role, and basically it's going to give the whole this area of work to a committee of industry competence, which the regulator will sit on and lead. So our HSE will be involved, and they will be publishing in this area at the moment, for the moment, non-statutory advice and guidance. Okay. So there's information coming forwards, going to be coming forwards there, and we look to see how that committee changes over the next 12-18 months. Beyond that, I'm sure many of you will have seen this. So BSI has published a document BS Flex 8670, which is a code of practice for competence in building safety. Okay, so that's the code of practice for construction, and that document defines competence in terms of skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. And those 4 criteria are very, very important if you think about how we go forward. So when we're looking at what will now happen is there will be a series of development of bespoke systems and competence schemes, and they need to consider those 4: skills, knowledge, experience, behaviours. Having done 8670, BSI is now coming on to produce standards for 3 new key roles, the 3 key roles as identified within the Hackett process. They are the principal designer, principal contractor, and building safety manager. The first draft for 8673 for building safety manager is out for comment. 8672 has a steering group is set up and is coming along. That's principal contractor. And 8671, the principal designer, there's a call out for setting up the steering group for that. So we can see that they're starting, or the work now on those 3 is starting. And beyond that, what will happen is 8670 is what's called a flex standard. So we have it, we use it, we have it and we will use it for the next 12 months, and then it will be reviewed in 12 months' time, and then it will be published as a full and formal BS standard. And this gives us the path for that. As you can see, this was subtly delayed, but it's slightly delayed. But this is where we are now. And within the Flex process, the overarching framework is published out as a BS Flex, and that will run for about the next 12 months, when it will then get reviewed and published as a BS. And these 3, principal designer, principal contractor, and building safety manager, have started working as a work towards producing them as what's called a PAS, a publicly available specification. So a possible path for the future, 8670 is published and defines its competence in terms of skills, knowledge, experience, behaviour. Those of you that know me and talk to me occasionally will know that I'm just shortening that down and saying, have you considered SCEB in that process? Better acronyms were available, but that's where we ended up. Once the building safety bill's in place, our new regulator is going to demand that we start to set up competence schemes, and hopefully it will be that we get to the situation where it's mandatory to have competence registered by a professional body or certified by a certification organisation. And so what will happen is competence schemes are going to be set up with increased rigour, maybe over where we are today, underpinned by third-party certification bodies, and that will give us somewhere going forward. So that's the sort of thing, and we need to consider how all that works through, and how in those certification schemes SCEB is considered as part of those certification offers. Beyond that, there, just as a mention, I'm going to say this to you now. There is a thing out there for building a safer future. There is within that the Building Safety Charter, and that's a signatories to a charter to say that they're going to work together to produce safer buildings. It sounds a bit motherhood and apple pie and all very, very nice, but it is actually, it's something that I would suggest, but go and have a look at the website on this. And I'm talking more and more about more really here today to installers, designers, rather than manufacturers, but there is also the Code of Construction Product Information under the Building a Safer Future scheme, which again, that will be more for manufacturers, and that's something that will be coming forwards in the future over the next few months. Okay, so that covers that. Well, that's competence. I'm going to blast through this next little bit. Why is this all so complicated? Well, the answer is that when you look at something like that picture there, there's a really critical chain of responsibility as it passes through here, from raw material and component suppliers through to design specifiers, designers, suppliers, and when you need all the people in the chain to be competent to ensure that that is achieved correctly. And you'd far rather that than some of these things. And I mentioned we still see the pink foam thing appears on LinkedIn. Pink foam seals appear on LinkedIn. These are a couple of my favorite horror pictures. Whoever thought that shoe covers were fire resistant? And so that's somewhere it's just not obviously not been done, and they are historic, but we still see examples of these sorts of things. And equally, design doesn't always help. How was it going? You were ever going to get an issue with some of these where you were going to get a successful outcome? Okay, because some of these are just designed in a way that you are never going to be able to construct them. There isn't the testing evidence that's going to cover a pipe running along the plane of a wall like you have on there on the left. And there are various things, even in that one, even in the one top right, where the studs have been cut, where you've compromised the effect of the wall. So even though that looks a really good affair, okay. And of course you get things like this, really quite complicated detail where there's all sorts of complex interactions, and have these been considered as you could bring different building systems together. And of course, you've all seen, I'm sure many of you will have seen, I've used this one before now, because whoever's done the job on this particular seal here, they've installed a fantastic thing, spatial coordination, brilliant, fire stopping, absolutely no chance. There is no standard at this stage. We're still working on one that would enable you to do that all in one fell swoop opening and do it all with one. Okay, so the design situation, you've got to consider these earlier. You've got to consider these correctly. From a fire resistance point of view, I've mentioned this before. Main fire resistance. The main fire resistance parameters: load bearing, integrity, insulation. They're all obvious. But within these, there's all sorts of other little sub-indices about whether it's in terms of whether it's got smoke control, whether it's which way the fire goes, what the fire scenario is, has it got insulation, has it got radiation, and there's a lot more complexity to these that you end up with these big long strings of characters that therefore describe your performance of your passive fire protection. And so that's it is really it's a very, very complicated subject, and I'm sorry it is, but if you don't deal with it correctly, you can potentially make mistakes. And we mentioned here with those previous slides about design, why we design in that way. Well, one of the challenges is, of course, we have design and build. And now whether under Hackett with for the high risk buildings with Gateway 1, we will have to see more and more of the design done up front rather than design and build. Design and build saves time, but conversely, what design and build does mean is that quite often you're still designing passive fire protection systems as you build the building. And you could have made mistakes very early on in the design, as we saw from that spatial coordination picture, that could leave you into problems. So don't, basically what you need to do is, we would say, involve specialists in this as soon as possible, and don't leave it to design and build, because in that way you could find that you're going to end up costing yourself more money and more time, and leave yourself in a situation where you have to go for engineering judgments, technical evaluations to deliver your performance. So that's our Hackett process. As I say, hopefully what we're here with this in Gateway 1 is that we're going to see that there's going to have to be some sort of fire safety statement, and hopefully that will see more of the design work being done earlier, and therefore fewer of these situations where we produce something that's really difficult to do the passive fire protection, and etc. etc. Now, beyond that, when to involve fire specialists, again, what I'm trying to say is get us in earlier and talk more about it, because you've got to do this to get it right. We produced a joint guide with FIS, launched September last year, where we would, in terms of fire stopping, we said consider it earlier and in greater depth. We put that document that's available on the website, has 9 golden rules. Golden rule 1, talk earlier. Okay, golden rule, which one is it? One of the golden rules is talk in more detail later on, and make sure you've got third-party certificated products installed by third-party certified installers. Okay, because there's 37 questions that you would need when you're designing a fire stop. It's 37 questions in that guide, and are you going to have the answers to all of those 37 questions? Okay, that's why you need to get you need to be aware that there are 37 questions, and then you need to make sure that you've got the right people involved to ask those 37 questions of. Okay, well, canter through this bit. In terms of how to interpret evidence for PFP products, there's an awful lot of information out there. In terms of starting off with the lowest quality and the lowest verification being manufacturer's literature, all the way through to third-party product certification, CE mark, which is underpinned with all sorts. Manufacturer's literature and data sheets, if it says it's tested to, it's designed to, it complies with, you don't know if it was tested. If it's designed to or it complies with, you don't know whether it was even tested. Was the testing done impartially? Have you got the correct level of performance? The infamous burger pictures. Is that potentially misleading? Now, hopefully under CCPI, we got going forwards, Code for Construction Products Information, manufacturers will be able to verify and show that there is a greater level of accuracy within their data. But the third-party certification and whatever takes you going forwards. A test report says that a product's been tested, but it's only a snapshot of product performance, and it may not relate to what the factory is actually producing nowadays. And my word of warning for all of these things is a test report can be a 50, 60, 70-page document with an awful lot of conclusions, which a person who's skilled in the art of reading a test report can read. But if you're looking to just take a test report and justify what you're constructing, that's a really difficult, that's a thing that there are a number of people who can do it, but usually they either work for a test lab or the manufacturers. And so the data and the conclusion can be opaque. So they're not necessarily the right thing. Within CE marking, we've got a couple of other things: extended application reports, XApps. Used to be only in Europe, but we now see them coming into the UK, BS 9414 for external walls. There's no necessarily any third-party involvement in them, but it gives you rules they give you rules to take you going forwards to what you can and can't do with a particular piece of test data. And then in Europe, you also get a thing called a classification report, which contains the classification of a product or system after testing. Again, what we're seeing now is that ADB is moving more and more towards classification reports. It's quoting EN 13501 Part 1 for reaction to fire, Part 2 for fire resistance, 3 and 4 for fire resistance. And so classification reports are being required more and more. Actually, probably a step down, and assessments and engineering judgments. These are opinion. They still need to be based on primary evidence and based on full report. And this document here that you can get off our website, the Passive Fire Protection Forum Guide, has a set of rules by which you can do these, because you will need these. We've got ASFP's got a document advisory note 17 that will explain to you areas where you're probably going to need one of these and areas where you're not going, where you can't use one of these. It's inappropriate. So you know, these are things, but there's still no third-party involvement in sample selection, and therefore that takes us to third-party certification and CE marking. We've got an initial surveillance visit to a factory. The specimens are chosen by the certification body. They're evaluated for fitness of purpose, and there's ongoing surveillance of manufacturer. So you know that the product that's manufactured today and sold today is the same product as you've got going forwards. And that takes us that, you know, and the third-party certification and CE marking comes with markings. So there's there's a number of certification bodies that get involved with this. Okay, that's definitely the route with the greatest rigor to ensure that the products you've got are going to be capable of delivering the products and performance you need. Need for a qualified person. This is, I apologize, Niall, I've pinched this one off you. Okay, so we've got 4 surgeons there, and the question is, who do you want to carry out your triple heart bypass? Okay, well, I know which one I want. Okay, and this then takes us to the same question, where I'm just going to give you 4 different job roles, and they're all wearing masks to be COVID secure, and ask you, who do you want to design and specify your passive fire protection? And that gets me to poll question 4. So, are you getting ready for the new competence requirements within Building Safety Bill? And we asked this previously, and the vast majority of people said yes, they were already looking to it, but let's see what we get from this particular organisation. I've got 480 on the call, nearly 500 of you. Excellent. So good news is the vast majority of you are already looking at it and thinking of it. 3% of you have never heard of it. Okay, well, I hope that the 3% of you who haven't heard of this aren't in the UK. And interestingly, it's not relevant to what a number of you do. Okay, right. I'm just going to mention briefly one of the things. There was a question earlier on, went through on the Q&A. As ASFP, we do organise training and education. We've got a foundation course that gives you an introduction in this, and we've got a level 3 certificate and a level 2 certificate in passive fire protection, jointly run through. We do the training. The examination is through the Institution of Fire Engineers because they're fully off-qualled up. And so there's an awful lot of stuff in there. They give you a good holistic start and that. But in terms of competency, they give you knowledge. Okay, there's lots of information on knowledge. Give you knowledge. They don't necessarily give you. We still need to look at this in terms of for competency going forward, in terms of skills, knowledge, experience, behaviours. But this is a good way to deal with the K. Okay, level 3 course, that tells you where it's aimed at. Level 2 course there, and new for this year, those courses have moved online. Okay, and we've got an adaptive learning platform, an AI learning platform that if you know the stuff, it will take you through very quickly. but if you make mistakes, it will circle back and give you greater breadth and depth to help you through that. So this is an interesting development, and we'll look to see how those go forwards. So look, here's my talk. Passive fire protection, it is a very complex subject. If you aren't someone who's competent in this area, always talk to someone who is. Hopefully now you, as a result of this, if you weren't already before, you'd be thinking to yourself, am I, aren't I, etc., etc. And for a best chance of success, always specify third-party certified products installed by third-party certified installers, and we look to see how over the next few months the regulations are going to change to get to that point and see where we go to. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Here we go. So what we've got is a panel session where we're looking at the Q&A. We've got 43 questions, plus a few other bits and pieces in the chat going forwards. And so I'm going to hand over for this next part of the session to Mike. Mike Ward's going to moderate us, and the rest of us are going to chip in as and when necessary. I can see lots of people's faces and cameras appearing in front of me. Mike, would you like to do the formal introduction of our guests?
I would indeed. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for everyone staying on the call. I hope 10 minutes was enough for some of you. So our esteemed panelists, and I do use the word esteemed for today, they've given up their time to help us. I'll run them in order of how I've actually written them down. Just 2 seconds and we'll just capture that. There we go. Right, so first on my list is Michael Wadood. I have to put my hand up and say myself and Michael do go back a number of years in my previous life. Michael is currently the director of SWACO, I hope I pronounced that right, and he used to be director of M&M Building Control. He's as CABE past president 2015 onwards, and went to the University of Westminster, where he studied building control surveying. So Michael is well placed to give us a view from a building control point of view. Next up is Simon Ince. Simon Ince is project manager of UL. He was a senior fire consultant at BB7, that's Ben Bradford. Ben Bradford was a past CABE, Chartered Association of Building Engineer president also. So Simon is now at UL, and our relationship with Simon is as a member. UL is a member of the ASFP, and Simon is currently doing some very good work in support of passive fire standards and learning and knowledge with UL, which we're working on with him. Beyond that, we have Ian McKilwee. Ian McKilwee is the CEO of the FIS, that's the Fire Industry, the Federation of Interior Specialists. It's too many acronyms. Ian was vice chair of the CPA, that's the Construction Products Association, and was also chief executive of the British Woodworking Federation also. And then finally, we have Trevor Rogers. Trevor Rogers is local authority LABC, local authority building control. And Trevor is also a member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. And he's also an associate member of the IFE, the Institute of Fire Engineers, and he has 35 years experience in construction industry, including 23 in building control. So if you have building control questions, I don't think there's a better place to come in terms of this particular session. So thank you for all attending. Thank you for giving your support to this particular webinar. So I'm going to dive into some of the questions. In no particular order. If we don't get to you, we will answer these questions by return to you. I'm conscious that although we do an hour, so I suppose it depends on the length, not necessarily the length of the question, but the length of the answers that we give you. So I'm going to go in with the first one. The first one, ironically, is an anonymous attendee. So anonymous attendee, so your question was, the Building Safety Bill, brackets Act, and all of its cascaded regulatory provisions is all very well defined for buildings in scope. There's nowhere to hide, but what about buildings not in scope, non-residential, for example? What is the regulatory framework for these buildings going forward? Surely construction as a whole needs to fall into line around sensible and overwatched building standards. As it is, we'll just be left with the race to the bottom on non-scope buildings. It's not in scope, so it doesn't matter. That's a statement, the last part. So I think the question there is what's going to change in relation to buildings that currently aren't in the scope of the buildings captured within the current draft of the Building Safety Bill. Andy, do you want to lead on that? And I think you may be better to bring in.
I was going to suggest that you brought in Trevor or Mike. From my point of view, there is an element. I think what will happen is that obviously the credible installers, designers, installers, etc., that are involved in buildings in scope will all get the necessary competence system. We'll all put in place the necessary competence measures to do that. But you're right. There's an element of will the tier ones going forward say, well, that's not in scope, so we're not interested in any of this, and will they carry on going for the lowest price, or will they turn around and say, well, they were competent enough to do it in the first place on a high risk, and therefore they would be competent enough to do it on this. It depends. I'd be intrigued to know what Trevor thinks on this one, and Michael.
Yeah, the building safety regulator is going to be regulating and registering building inspectors, certainly in the building control sector, and that will go throughout the whole of the scope of works of buildings as a whole. So that's certainly one element where there will be a regulatory framework for out of scope buildings. Also, there is a potential for the scope to expand should things not improve outside of that.
That's very true, of course. Yes.
Michael, any viewpoints on that one?
The infamous, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'd agree with Trevor on that particular point. The current legislation about in scope and not in scope, they are focusing on the residential schemes. The commercial and office buildings that are being built under regulatory requirements, which are only minimum standards. And I think that's an issue that needs to be borne out, is meeting the building regulations is just meeting the minimum standard. And we should all be building beyond minimum standards. So there are provisions about fire safety, about sprinkler protection, and it is very much ensuring that those involved in the design actually follow it, and to an extent push the boundaries further than what the minimum requires.
And I think I absolutely agree. And I think part of obviously what's coming out of this bill and the working groups that are looking to develop improving standards are looking to exactly do that. I think that one of the challenges is, of course, anything that's voluntary does require people to buy into that voluntary requirement. Okay, thank you for that one.
Mike, do you mind if I hop in on the end of that one as well?
Yeah, sure. Ian.
It's an important point to make is we don't operate in a regulatory void now. There is a regulatory framework, and I think one of the important things about the Building Safety Bill is it starts to define what's reasonable, and those reasonable behaviours are going to inevitably cascade into all parts of construction. And it's not true to say it doesn't completely cover other types of building. It's less onerous and it's less specific about other types of buildings. But again, the Construction Products Regulator is looking not just at high-risk buildings, but at all buildings. So I think there'll be an overarching change to behaviours that will drive through construction that's driven by all of this. And that's that question called, did you do all that's reasonable? That's the one question you never want to be asked, because it's likely to be somebody in a curly wig who's asking you that while you're stood with a hand on a Bible, And I say the building safety bill goes a long way to defining reasonable, and it's going to be much harder to wiggle out of, even if you're not being prosecuted under those regulations, the general product safety regulations or other parts of construction regulation. It'll be much harder to wiggle out of a prosecution if reasonable is being defined by law.
Can I just add to that as well? I agree totally with Ian there, but you've got to ask yourself the question. They're creating a two-tier system. So the government are creating a two-tier system, and of course, best practice will filter down. But where's all the competence going to go? To the highly regulated area. So all the competence is going to drift upwards. So what's going to happen to the non-regulated area? Is that going to get worse? Potentially, it could get worse. You know, because no one's looking at it. We know where the focus is. We know where the potential for prosecutions are, and it's at the high end. So naturally, the principal designer, principal contractor are going to make sure all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. But are they going to take the eye off the ball for the other areas?
I think that's correct. I think we've got some way to go with this, haven't we? And of course, it does buy, and you know, there is this phrase "golden thread," and it does require that thread to be maintained all the way through the construction design, procurement, construction process, and then obviously handover there on after. So I think it'll be certainly interesting to see where we end up with this, but it does require everyone to buy into the fact that, you know, we do need to improve standards, but of course culture does run top down. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, we have a question from Craig Head. Just because a company is third-party accredited may not mean that the person undertaking the installation is accredited. How can we ensure that individuals are also certified? And they put brackets CSCS with a series of question marks after CSCS. I'm assuming that that's a sort of a challenge to say that maybe CSCS isn't enough. Can I hand that one over? Let's have a third-party accredited. Simon, would you like to pick this one up from a certifying point of view?
Yes. Realistically, third-party certification is just part of the due diligence process. So you as an end user should be satisfied that the scheme is robust enough to, it's got enough checks and balances in to make sure that you're happy with it. So don't think third-party is a panacea, it covers everything. You've got to do your own due diligence and make sure the scheme is containing everything that needs to be in place. So the other parts of due diligence, obviously referencing, making sure you've got your own checks and balances in place on site as well, and checking CSCS cards is part of that process. The aim of third-party certification is to give you assurance that something is done properly, and that's all it is. It's not a guarantee that it's done properly. So your own checks and balances should be in place as well.
And Trevor, any views on the same?
We would certainly encourage third-party installers to actually engage with building control and show us what your what's going on in the systems that they're using. Ultimately, you're trying to prove to building control that your systems are appropriate and that the installation is satisfactory. So any communications that we can have, even joint site visits, it's certainly helpful in terms of showing that compliance.
And Michael, do you have any views?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd agree as well. What I found is some of the third-party verifications, the work itself has been undertaken by competent people, and then the manufacturers, in some instances, have come round and they've done review checks on their products being installed and making sure it's been installed correctly. And they willingly come down and do that on larger sites, and I think that should be applauded and actually should be promoted, and others should also undertake that function where they do come along and do spot checks, and it keeps the industry on their toes. Building control do come along and do their spot checks, and it's well known from a building control perspective, where fire stopping, for example, has been undertaken and has been certified and signed off, and the label has been applied to where the fire stopping has been done, and there's no issues about what has been done. But by the time I, for example, do my inspection, a couple of weeks later, or even a month after the installation, you notice that other cables have come through and damaged what's been done, and again, it's just mindful of the entire site management that they need to just watch and walk over and just make sure things are still as they are when they were handed over.
Ian,
if you can if you can deconstruct a fire stop whilst we're there and show that it's been installed satisfactorily, it does give us a great deal of confidence on a spot check that that the installation is actually as it should be.
And Ian, thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, I think it's right to put question marks after the CSCS card, because CSCS card is not a competency scheme. It's a mechanism for measuring the competence of an individual. And to be honest, we don't use it properly. It's only as good as the qualifications that are put on it and the training that the individual's had. It's a passport to carry information, that card. And it's too often we see on construction sites that people are working off the green card with experience. You know, knows what she's been doing it a long time, but they've never bothered to get the qualification. So we're not even using it at sites where people don't have the right card party certification schemes such as Simon Run. And it's a really important, the CSCS is a really important support for that. But as a sector, we still don't use it properly. And that's its fundamental flaw. So at the moment, you know, we want to see blue-carded tradesmen doing the work, and that's something that we've tried at times as an industry to shut gates on sites. But this is where procurement and the construction programming let us down, because what happens is you're delayed on the contract. All of a sudden, you have a surge on that part of the program, and you've gone from having 40 dry liners on site, where we're going to get the labour from, and it becomes a mess and a muddle. So I think it's really important we start getting back to actually using the cards properly, in line with the SCEB stuff that Andy so eloquently talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think that has been one of the commentaries running through discussions, is that, you know, what the value of CSCS in terms of actually how it gives confidence in terms of somebody's individual competency, as you say. There are a number of similar questions actually relating to third-party certification.
Mike, before you jump on, can I just say a couple of three things? There's the issue of new cabling damaging fire stopping is something we find on a regular basis. There's a comment in the chat box. Michael's has swung in, said I totally agree with that, and it's been raised a couple of times. I totally agree with it. It's one of the things that we actually, and it comes down to the question of, you know, do you know what, are you unconsciously incompetent? You know, a telecoms engineer comes along and precision cuts a hole in that flexible wall, in that partition, using a claw hammer to pass a Cat5 cable from one room to another above a fire door, and you've wrecked it. There is an element of, in terms of installer records, the old golden thread comes back. You need a record of what you've done. You know, show to me that I've cut the hole, I've passed the services have passed through. This is how I've made it good. This is like this is how I've cut the bat. This is installed the bat. This is how I've made it all off. Boom, done. That's the finished job. There's my little label, and I've got a record of how all that, underpinned by the testing and certification evidence that come with it. That gives you that whole record for that seal. We are going to get massively big digital files coming forwards in terms of the digital record of what's the installed measures within a building. But then, having said that, we need to make sure that as well as our people, our skilled operatives having the training necessary and the competence necessary, we need to make sure that general construction has the competence to recognise that that's a firewall. there is some form of fire resistance in that if I go and put a hole through there and pass a cable through there, it won't be done. I had a phone call from a Virgin Telecom engineer, or the cable systems are available, who had been given an instruction to pass a cable through a fire door jamb, and was saying, I'm not doing it. Can you please tell me if I'm doing it right or not? So you get that sort of thing, and from time to time, and we need general industry to be aware of this as much, not to the same breadth and depth, but just to be aware, to make sure that we don't create these things in the first place. So this whole competence question is going to work at various different levels. You know, there's a different level of competence required for a BT engineer, just so that he recognises that this might affect the fire resistance performance of this building, all the way through to somebody who's actually designing and installing systems. And I'll be quiet now.
No, that's fine. I think it is. There's various levels, and the initial one is actually somebody like the BT engineer recognising that she could create a problem by virtue of the works that they're doing, and not realising actually that they create a problem once they walk away. So that's the very first level. So just sticking on the theme of third-party certification or accreditation, I think one of the more established areas of it is, of course, the testing and certifying of products, where it is I suppose it's a slightly easier journey. You create a product, you test it to the applicable standards, you get a result, and you get a third-party certification under whichever scheme it is that supports that product, and you have varying differences by extended application, so size or application of use or substrate, for instance, of what you're fitting that product to. One of the areas that seems to be a little bit more more convoluted is that of installation. So there's a couple of questions. One is a sort of question statement from Tom Laws. He said, we are seeing more and more new PFP companies joining the market. Do you think that third-party accreditations should be introduced on a tiered system of competency for all installation contractors, brackets, new and old? I think we've partially covered that in the previous one, but I just wanted to emphasise that this is there seems to be a commonality here. Moving on to Ahmed Hussein, this is a question that's quite close to my heart. It is common practice for manufacturers and installers not to provide primary test evidence and/or global assessments, citing confidentiality or on the basis of being third-party accredited. This is especially prevalent with fire doors. Will CCPI address this? So I think what I'd like to try and do is just break that down into a couple of areas. The first thing is there a need for a more robust third-party certification scheme to support installers based on the fact that they need to demonstrate competency, whether that's at the very lower level of recognising there could be a problem vis-a-vis BT engineer, or actually being far more educated formally in the practical side of someone's works, if they are effectively a specialist passive fire stopper. That's question part one. Part two is, what are our thoughts on the issues of providing test evidence? I'll open that up for answers later on. In my view is that if you present a certificate from a third party, basically saying that this company is tested to this standard and they have passed within the requirements of the standard, that should be accepted without the need for issuing huge bundles of paperwork, which, in my experience, most people, unless they're trained in reading it and understanding it, don't understand anyway, which is why third-party certification was created. So let's just move back to the first one. Third-party certification for installers, varying degrees. Do we think that's an idea, and what do we think it looks like? Ian McKilwee, most of your members are installers in the Federation of Interior Specialists. What do you think?
I think that what we're talking about there is maybe the shortcoming between product and installation certification. In product certification, there's very clear test standards that we base a certification on. It's a little bit more nebulous in the world of installation, so we need to bring more rigor to that. How do we test an individual's competence? And I think that's where the SCEB stuff comes in. You know, that's sort of what's their personal skill, what's their experience, and I think the behaviours one is really important because competency is fluid. Somebody may not be competent because of a sequence of events that may have affected their ability to perform at work. So it's not a fluid thing, and that's where the supervision and the third-party certification provide additional support. I think to sort of unpick the second part of that question is a lot more complex, Mike. But the product let me come back to that, because I think the important point there is about the installation. I'll let others talk about the product certification because they're more expert in that space.
Thanks, Ian. Excellent. Trevor, thoughts? So effectively, third-party certification for installers, and also thoughts on third-party certification or accreditation of products and or services. Ahmed is saying that regardless of being issued with a third-party certificate, he's suggesting that he would still like to see the full test report. I have my views on that. What are yours?
I think we would like to get to a stage where we could certainly just have the third-party certification and not have to troll ourselves through a myriad of very complex and in-depth test reports. I think the certification that we do receive would have to be very clear. I think sometimes that the third-party certification is nuanced as well. We need to be very clear what it covers. But yeah, if we can get to that position, I think I certainly don't enjoy going through a myriad of product documents just to try and find out whether an installation will be compliant.
Thanks, Trevor. Simon, you test and certify things all day long. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, third-party certification of products is open for anyone to view. So as a certification body, we certificate products and systems, and we put that on our listing. So the scope is clear within the certification. It says this is what the products have been tested with, this is the format, this is the dimensions, this is, you know, all that information on third-party certification is available. It's just a question of having the internal competence and the will to do some checking every now and again to make sure that actually what the contractor's telling you stacks up. So when it's been tested, that's an indication of the likely performance on site. But if the on-site installation is very, very different, then you're not going to get that same level of assurance. And so there is an element of people now training at housing associations, for example, training up their housing officers or someone who's particularly in charge of fire safety to actually have that level of competence and understanding to do some spot checks internally. So almost like the internal clerk of works. And we've seen it before with the Irish Health Service when they trained up all their fire safety officers in passive fire protection. So when contractors were on site, they could actually spot the issues early doors. And I think that's where people have got to go. They can't just assume that because it's a third-party contractor that they're actually doing the job properly. It's an indication they're doing the properly. They've got competent people. They're doing their own quality assurance checks and balances. The destructive testing. They're making sure that the on-site installation is good. But you still have to do your own work, and that's what I'm saying. That's a message I'm trying to get across to people: is you have to have a due diligence process yourself. You can't just assume.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on certification or third-party certification and installation, which, as Ian points out, is a far more fluid situation to try and manage?
It's only as good as the scheme provider and the assurances that they deliver. Well, I've been calling for a long time for all the certification bodies to get together. In fact, I asked the ASFP this week to try and facilitate that, so we can start to look at it and how we can support raising the bar. So currently, we've got third-party certification. Can we do more? Can we make it tighter? Can we cooperate with each other? So if a contractor gets kicked off one scheme, they don't just go to the next provider and get on the next one. So to be on a third-party certification scheme should be worthwhile. So if you're missing out on work because you can't tender for it because you haven't got it, then you're going to make sure you keep on those registers. And I think that's where we've got a little bit of a job to do as a sector and third-party certifications, try and work together and push this thing forward.
Absolutely. Okay. And Michael, any thoughts?
No, I'd agree with Simon's last comments there about contractors. It is important that they maintain their competency, but it's not the contractors; it's the people they employ. And yes, that is an uphill struggle that needs to be looked at, and I think it can be done. And in doing so, you actually keep your workforce. And maybe we need to have an industry where the workforce isn't migratory. They actually start to remain with that workforce and move from project to project to project, as opposed to go off and working for other people, taking their ticket, so to speak, with them of competency. So I mean, yeah, I think that's probably somewhere in the future, but that would be an aspirational goal to head for, and that would give a certain amount of assurance for industry to know that yes, you know, that competency, that self-certification, it stays with that company and that the employees that they have. So that's something that could, you know, maybe that's an aim, an aspirational goal, as I said.
Absolutely. I think that is something that, you know, what comes out of competency and what that looks like moving forward, I think is the challenge. As a series of stakeholders, if you look at the RIBA plan of work program and all of the stakeholders involved in the design, all the way through to handover, and even the people taking up residence of that building, you know, very much at the front end and the back end, certainly as far as us as an association is concerned, you know, we have a challenge to improve competency with designers, you know, all the way through engineers, and all the way down through to people who procure, you know, people who make decisions in main contractors, equal and or approved, swapping out specified products for other products. You know, how are they qualified, you know, to make that decision? And then all the way through to building sign-off and facilities management and dare I say, fire safety managers, and even, you know, the occupiers themselves. There's a whole thread here of competency that we need to improve in these specialist areas. I mean, the ASFP is dedicated to passive fire. You know, there are other very pointed, what we call the dark arts of the construction industry, which need to, you know, improve knowledge across the whole remit of people involved. Third-party certification is part of it, as I think we've all agreed. And the installation side is clearly an area that seems to be creating a lot of dialogue. So thanks for taking part in that question. I'm sorry it was a little bit of a sort of extended question. I was trying to link a couple together to give us something to really sort of chew on.
Mike, can I just jump in very quickly, because
Yeah,
the
sure.
second part of that question was about the CCPI.
Yes.
And it's not in itself third-party certification. It's actually about marketing integrity, the CCPI. So I think it's quite important to say it doesn't do the job of third-party certification, but it does look at a structured way in which people market their products, not just from a testing point of view. And I thought that was, in the way the question was phrased, it's not unreasonable for manufacturers to withhold certain information, because they have often invested fortunes in testing and research in order to get them to a certain point. And if they did just release that open on the market, everybody could copy what they've done. So we have to remember some of these manufacturers are in business, and there is certain parts of IP that they're going to want to protect as part of that. And I think that's where the third-party certification and Simon's comments comes in there, because you shouldn't need to go back and interrogate all of their test information, because the scope is clear and it's already been checked by a UCAS-approved third-party accredited company. So yeah, I think sort of manufacturers aren't doing it to be difficult, but they're doing it to protect their businesses. And you know, they've probably spent fortunes failing tests to get to a point where they've found a way of making something pass.
Yeah, I can just jump in there, because Ian's absolutely right. If a manufacturer's producing a fire retardant varnish or coating, for example, they don't want to give their formula away. they will declare that to the independent test lab and the certification body. So we will have checked the percentage of FR in there, or whatever it might be, or the type of FR, and we'll confirm that. When we release their certificate, their certification document, it won't have that in. Those details will be voided, so no competitors can compete again, but it will have the scope of the usage. So it will tell you where it can be used, how it can be used, what the application rate is, etc. And therefore you can match that on site. So all the vital stuff is there, and all the sensitive stuff has been removed, but it's freely available on all the certification websites. You can go and check the product X, and you can go and see what the scope is.
And that's absolutely right, Simon.
Mike, if I can just, there was an interesting point I mean, because everything that Simon and Ian have just said, I would completely agree with. From my background, if you go back in time to where I started off life watching paint dry, you take a reactive coating for structural steel, you get a certificate for one of those products that can have somewhere in the region of 20,000 different loadings, combinations of section factor, temperature, and time period, and shape. And you get these big long tables, and if you want to find the test evidence that relates to one particular value in there, you won't, because that's all been done. You will take a series of fire tests, you will run them through an assessment methodology that's well known and well written and whatever, and that will then give you those certificated numbers. So if you're going to take a test report and want to see that particular number in the test report, bearing in mind there can be 20,000 different numbers in that certificate, you aren't going to find it there. And the certificate is the one that's underpinned with all the thing to make sure that third-party stuff, to make sure that it's properly tested, properly assessed, and you've got that information. You've also got all the factory production control stuff and the ongoing surveillance to make sure the product you buy today is the same as it was when it was tested. However, which none of that comes from the test report. The interesting comment then that comes in the chat to say, well, hang on, I don't get full information on all the components that are in there, and I'm left trying to evidence by independent assessments. So if that's the case, I would turn around and say, well, we need to get, one of the things we've been discussing is a possibility of making sure that we've got formalized common templates for certification to make sure that these things are readily available and understood. And therefore, and as Simon says, get everybody together and bring up the standard of these certification processes, so that that situation that's described in the chat box doesn't exist, and you can clearly see what the components are and how to install it in that case. And that's the sort of thing that we should see. You should be able to clearly make sure that when you take a certificated detail, you can identify what's involved and construct it as per certification.
You're absolutely right. And actually, we have a question from Jody Toms in relation to a very similar thing. In terms of what has been said, I mean, I came from a specialist manufacturer of, in my case, it was fire curtains, and the company involved would still be argued that they were the leader of that industry. And we spent huge amounts of time, effort and money protecting our IPR to make sure that, the company always stayed ahead. Notwithstanding, in terms of Jody Tom's question, he says, how do we stand with the manufacturer keeping the test report confidential? When the tested substrate is not tested substrate, I hang heavy on the word substrate, is not listed on the certificate, but is on the test data, they will confirm by email that it's tested and documented to the substrate, but nothing official. Our third-party installation auditor cannot accept emails from the manufacturer, only the official test data. So we are stuck in a stalemate with no progression. And I think that goes back to your statement, Andy, is that maybe the third-party certificates aren't detailed enough to cover the day-to-day applications, to allow people to accept certificates. I mean, certainly from my experience, the company I work for had different substrate packs, and we tested the fixings of that product within those substrates in terms of the centers, the depths of fixing, and the type of fixing. And we got assessments within that third-party certificated team to cover all of the predominant substrates that they may come across. Any thoughts on that in terms of that Jodie's question, Simon?
I don't understand why the substrate isn't listed in the certification document, not a test evidence. Test evidence might not be supplied, might not be given, but certainly within the certification documentation, that should be listed in there as part of the way it was tested. And I can't understand why they wouldn't have that information if it is a certificated product. Let me give you an example from my testing days. The manufacturers of wallpaper coverings will play the system. They will test over a calcium silicate board rather than plasterboard. In the UK, most wall coverings go on plasterboard, but they get a better result if they test it on calcium silicate, and that would be included in the certification scope. So if they've tested on that, then we'd include that. Whereas a manufacturer might claim a performance gained on a calcium silicate board. So it really is a question of test evidence not being available, but third-party certification evidence is always available.
I agree, and I'm slightly struggling with the substrate question, in the sense that certainly the certificates I had produced did nominate the substrates that the product had been tested to be fixed to, and I actually think it's probably more of a, if they have a third-party certificate which doesn't reference the substrate, surely it's a conversation with the certifying body responsible to question that certificate and see whether they can get the information from the certifying body, who has a duty of care to support their certification. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on. This one's quite an interesting one, and I think it's very current, actually. So this is an anonymous attendee. It says, it appears at the moment that many NHBC and LABC officers are not accepting manufacturer guidance based on fire tests. We are having manufacturer design systems reject due to there not being a direct fire test. Obviously, we would use systems that have direct fire tests, but not everything can be tested. Therefore, the manufacturer's guidance is essential, as they are using the scientific data. I use that word quite loosely, that phrase quite loosely, and make judgments, I also use that very loosely, based on this. Have the NHBC and LABC officers been given directives to only accept systems with direct test evidence? Okay, so so without prejudice in any sense or form. Michael Woodou, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I know, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree, it would probably be an enormous amount of task for manufacturers to fire test every product that they've got. And so they might take a sample, or they'll take a product and they'll test it. Like it comes back to these substrates again, isn't it? It's about which substrate goes for which product, and I'm sure they can't test everything. But equally, I think if we just break it down to what we do know, which is fire doors. Let's hit that one on the head first of all. We know that fire doors should have a certified test result on that door, and if that door doesn't have a full test result, and that includes the door and the frames, then it's something that we can't accept. And that's what government have put down in the circular. So that's a definite. Other factors, I without a bit more information as to what is being talked about, the only thing that comes to my mind is fire doors. Which might have different, the manufacturers might turn around and say the door's fine, or this frame might be smaller, larger, fatter, thinner, but it's okay. But really, I think it is about the substrate item. I believe items should be tested in its entirety, and not taken out of context. Just one item. It's the door, and it's the frame, and it's the ironmongery that makes a fire door, not just a door on its own.
I think the key there is if you're presented with a certificate to support a door set that has been tested, then only the contents and the material buildup of that door set should be installed, not just the leaf of said door set. And also, I think one of the things we've come across is we see people advertising let's call them inventions that they've created themselves. LinkedIn, I did notice one a few weeks ago, where they'd effectively created a box that you put around, say, pipe penetration around a wall, and they'd made this, they'd created this themselves using fire-rated board, fire-rated mastic, some timber stud, and various other things. And they were effectively saying, you know, look at this. This solves a problem. And of course, what they've done is they've created effectively a new product made up of a series of common parts. All of those common parts already been tested in their own right, but now it's been applied as a new thing, brought together, and, you know, a new thing's been created. And I actually raised the question to this individual. I said, well, have you had this thing tested? And they said, no, all the individual things that make up this thing have, but this hasn't. And I said, but that isn't actually, that's not the answer that you know, the right answer is that you now need to go and test it as a new thing. And I think this is partly where this comes from. You're using a series of products which have been tested, but actually what you're doing is creating something new, and then you're following the individual manufacturer's guidance of the products that you use to make up this item, and trying to effectively suggest that it is compliant because of the individual components have been tested in their own right. Trevor, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of completely new products being created from a series of different tests. But obviously, engineering judgments of products that have got a myriad of testing is something that, if a case is put forward to building control, we should consider it and look at it in the round. But it is a case of going that extra mile in terms of providing the evidence as to why we should accept a particular situation.
Yeah, I think, and Ian, your members face installation challenges, problems every day, and they're at the coalface. You know, it's all right for us lot sitting, you know, 3 miles away from the front line, you know, putting our orders across, but actually, you know, what are the challenges and how do you think the best way of resolving some of these are for your members? Are you with us, Ian?
It's funny. So I'm actually on the front line at the moment, so it looks a lot nicer than many. But one of the conversations I've been having today has been on this very subject, because we're confronted with a lot more problems than we need to be. Because design liability is increasingly being pushed down the supply chain. So it's really important to have track.
Oh, I think we've lost Ian.
We might have lost Ian there at that one.
We might have lost Ian.
Mike, can I jump in while we're waiting for Ian?
Thank you for saving us, Simon.
Sorry.
And you've saved us from me as well.
Yeah, this is creeping in more and more. The demand for primary test evidence is clear in housing, for example, where housing associations won't have anything in their building that doesn't have primary test evidence. It's all to do with accountability, I think. If anyone's seen any of the Grenfell inquiry, no one's coming out well out of that. No one wants to make a decision. They want to check cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So primary test evidence, that's what was tested in that configuration. That's what's in the building. Is satisfying most people, and I think it's unconsciously creeping in, obviously, to building control, if that's the case, where people don't want to accept anything that's not primary. You know, any kind of assessment, any kind of big scope of you know, conditions. In terms of assessments, the assessments are not to be done in place of testing, and I think that's a key fact to get across to people, that, you know, it should be considered where something can't be tested in that configuration. If I think of an example, glazing, for example, the test rigs are only a certain size, but in buildings it goes in much bigger. So there's an engineering judgment by a technical expert that says, well, actually it won't make any difference if we make it bigger. You know, the limitation was on the size of the furnace, the size of the specimen that could be tested, but we're happy with that. And there's plenty of guidance out. I've just recently rewritten all our standard operating procedures, so we can make sure we comply with the PFPF guidance on assessment in support of test evidence, not in lieu of test evidence, instead of test evidence. It's in support of test evidence. So everything that gets assessed should have some backup in terms of test evidence.
Yeah, I agree. And sorry, Andrew.
I was going to say, I mean, I've mentioned in the press a thing called Advisory Note 17. There are occasions when, you know, if you look at some of the complex interactions that you get on a building site, you know, there's a picture in the presentation of a duct, a damper, and a pipe and a cable passing through the same opening. The duct, the damper, the pipe, and the cable are all tested to 3 different tests. So how do you fire stop something along that line when you've got 3 different tests that you're going to be pulling information from, and they're all tested on their own singly? Okay, we saw one where there was a piece of structural steel running on a compartment line that was then going to be boxed in. The structural steel had intumescent paint on it. That's a different test to the compartmentation, the flexible wall system underneath it. So you will have elements of things on a construction site where different construction systems interact. And in those instances, there is no standard test method, and there's no easy way. So you're either faced with ad hoc test method or evaluation of that interaction. And there is an element of, you know, these buildings have complicated systems pulling things from many different places that you have to model how these interactions are going to work. And we can't necessarily do all that by primary test evidence, because the standards don't exist. So some of those things you are going to be faced. You need to make considered evaluations, and you will need to do technical evaluations, make sure they're done right. But these technical evaluations should all be underpinned by appropriate primary data. I like Simon's assessments in support of test evidence. Advisory Note 17 does tell you there are a number of occasions when you cannot and you must not, and this is legally written, that thou shalt not use an assessment to justify the use of a reaction to fire B or worse material on an external wall of a building in scope. Okay, so let's be clear, you can't do that, but there are things that you can do, and you're probably going to have to do because there's no clear test method.
Thanks, Andy, and that's right. And there's a number of different challenges, isn't there? There's extended applications beyond the tested parameter. You know, Simon says most furnaces are 3 meters by 3 meters in this country, and if you've got fire-rated glazing, curtain walling, or even fire curtains, and all of a sudden you're asked to fill a hole that's 12 meters wide by 4 meters tall, that's significantly bigger than your original test evidence, and you have to apply for an extended application assessment. I'm just is Ian back with us? Are you back with us, Ian?
I am, Mike. Sorry
Excellent.
about that.
Okay, no, that's okay. I've got one final question which I want to throw in before we wrap up. But I just thought I'd give you the opportunity just to go back to that question, if there's anything you'd want to sort of just elaborate on quickly.
No, I think just very quickly, I'd say, I'm on a construction site now, and the conversation we had first thing this morning was around design liability. And this, the Gateway 1 is pulling that forward, but in practice at the moment, we're pushing it out. And we're seeing design liability pushed down to subcontracts. And we're even getting dry liners now being given design liability because the detail's not being thought through. So I think these kind of conversations are really important, but come back to Andy's point, early engagement and make sure we're having them before we're making decisions on site. Because I tell you what, when there's huge delay clauses built up, you're less likely to make an informed and progressive decision there when you've got it all weighing down on you than in the design phase a year, 12 months prior. And I think I love the way that Adam Turk phrased that in a recent meeting on the CPCI. We procure in calm, and we design in calm, and we procure in chaos. And I think that's my big issue, is we make bad decisions on site because people have got under too much pressure because it's not thought up early enough.
I think, being a specialist subcontractor for many years, I absolutely agree with you. I think there's, first of all, there's design with a big D or a small d, and where do you sit within that? And I think yes, you're absolutely right. The pressures of liquidated damages and all the other things that are part of the contract don't necessarily always help with doing the job well and properly thought through and considered. Thanks for that, Ian. Right, one more. This is anonymous, and I'm gonna put this to our LABC and CABE panelists first. And here we go. And this is to finish off the panel session. This is from anonymous. Can you elaborate on how pink foam products have become so ubiquitous throughout the industry without the body of evidence to back them up? Specifically, the gaps in the certification process that allow this to happen. Mike Dude.
Not really. I think it's very much awareness of suitable products, and it's keeping on top of what's out there on the market and what can be used. What tends to happen is people tend to look at the labels, read the labels, and then if they question it, they may just ask for the test data to justify the product. I think pink, well, let's just say foam. The biggest issue I've had is how much foam do you use to fill a gap? And I've got photographs where I am not joking. Because the structural opening was much wider. I don't know how many cans they've used, but they had to rake it all out and redress the gap, which was significantly wider than 50 mil, significantly wider. But in answer to the question, I think it's awareness of what is acceptable. There are some which are, and there are some that are not, and it's the building control surveyors and others who are doing that inspectorate role, just being mindful of asking the question and asking for the test data and checking the widths that have been applied, which I think is important.
Yeah, there is regulation regulating it. We're all sort of, I think, pretty aware of that. Trevor, do you have anything to follow up on Michael's comments?
Yeah, I agree. It's the easy solution, isn't it? That's there. People who are not understanding of how it's applied and how it's used. It's the off the shelf, off the superstore shelf solution. I mean, I've actually seen foam used for bedding brickwork, so it's not just fire stopping; it's used everywhere. So it's yeah, it's just available, I think, to people that don't understand what to do with it.
Yeah. And Ian, your thoughts on that from the Federation of Interior Specialists?
Yeah, I think it comes down to competence again, doesn't it? What are people competent to do within tasks, within occupation, and do they understand the products they're working with? So I think I just echo everything else that's said. It comes back to that debate: are they competent to know what they're doing and to ensure that that product is suitable for the task that they're using it for?
Thanks, Simon. Your thoughts on testing and certifying pink foam?
Just a shame we've only got a few minutes left, because this is my pet subject really, and this is one of the areas where we actually created a video, ASFP video, design and specifying fire protection, and it was created on the issue with pink foam. And the reason we did that, I was sat in a housing association meeting, and one housing association officer said, we're taking all the grey and the beige foam out of all our buildings and replacing it with pink foam because that's the good stuff. And that is a genuine quote from that meeting, and that's why we put that video together. And I've used it so many times, not only for contractors, but also for fire officers, for associated trades like sprinkler installers. And I've showed them the actual test evidence that we did at Warrington at the time. And the first pink foam failed in, I think, about 2.5 minutes. And it said 1 hour 20 on the tin. And I think it's one of the, I can't remember who said it, but people just look at the tin and say, an hour and 20 minutes, you know, let's use it because it's bound to be good stuff. And it isn't, you know, it's not fit for purpose in many usages. Yeah,
I think we could spend a whole 2 hours on pink.
Yes, we could.
Well,
okay.
We could, but only if the pink foam is in a narrow linear gap between concrete to concrete surfaces of about 200 mil depth. The answer is, there's a number of people posted, where can we get the video? The video's on the ASFP's website. It basically, that the issue here is that the pink foams may well have a linear gap approval, but that's for narrow, deep linear gaps within concrete to concrete on most occasions. Whereas if you put it in a flexible wall and pass pipes and cables through it, it will last us. It won't do the 2 hours. It will last a much shorter distance. And of course, the difference is that linear gaps are tested to it says it's got 2 hours BSEN 1366 part 4, which is the linear gap standard. It's not part 3, which is the penetration, the pipe and cable standard. And so that's the challenge. And it's the fact that people don't understand the difference between part 3 and part 4. There are a number of us who do, but you know, generally it's not going to be. So that's why we have the issues with pink foam, I'm afraid. And obviously, yes, we work long and hard and talk about pink foam and other such bits and pieces of that we see in construction that we don't like. But at least that way, we see the fact that these, you know, we get the message out to more and more people through these things. We've got a number of people have asked for the video. Go look on the website and see it. Tell your friends, as the Blues Brothers would say. You know, and you know, let's get the message out there, folks. Okay.
Excellent. Right. So thank you. Okay. So all it leaves me to do is thank Michael Wadood, Trevor Rogers, Ian McIlwee, and Simon Ince. Thank you very much for giving it your time. We do appreciate it and your participation. And because you've participated, we'll probably call on you again. So unfortunately, you are victims of your own success. We have about 80 questions. I know we've only answered a very small number of them. We will get back to everybody in some form in terms of response. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand you over to Andrew Taylor to close this session. So thank you all from me, and I hope you enjoyed the second half of this. Thanks very much.
I'm just going to mention before I go any further. Can you make the audience aware that squirty foams are banned from use on UK railway infrastructure? That I didn't know. So I've learned something new today. I don't know where that is, whether that's in the BS 9992 or whichever part it is that covers railway infrastructure, but that's a really useful thing to know. Right, reminder for everybody as we go. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks for being here. I hope it's been of use to you. Remember, it's info@asfp.org.uk for in the next 2 weeks, please, so that we can sort you out with a CPD certificate for 2 whole earth hours. And you can get we'll sort that out for you. Not if you're watching this on catch up, I'm afraid, as your email will be charged. Unfortunately, we can't give them out to people who are watching on catch up. I've been asked to mention to you that we've got an awards lunch. We're actually having a face-to-face event. And that's we've got an awards. Nominations are open, and the awards will be given out at an awards lunch, and you can get your tickets today. It's in Manchester. He said the one thing you haven't put on here, Georgina, is the date. Oh yeah, it's there, Friday the 26th of November. Okay. So it's Friday the 26th of November, but if you want any information either to attend, to book, or we've got some spaces for sponsorship, please get in touch with Georgina at the office, and you can see her email on the slide there. So awards lunch, Friday the 26th of November, hopefully see some of you there. Beyond that, that's us done. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for attending. We've had we touched almost 500, just under 500 at the peak. Stay online as the session closes. There will be some post-webinar questions pop up. A SurveyMonkey, I think it is, that asks you a few questions about what we do, etc., etc. Our next webinar is Wednesday, the 21st of July, PFP and refurbishment. We've got more webinars out on the list coming forward, so keep an eye out for members updates and keep an eye out for more webinars on our website. And that's us for today. Thanks very much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it's been useful, and we will see you all soon.